Remember when a magical car lifted off a cliff and every matinee became unforgettable? Dick Van Dyke, Sally Ann Howes, and the Child Catcher, all hiding secrets nobody expected. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts you never knew about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Number 15. You probably think of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang as pure candy-colored invention, but the story behind the story is something far more personal than you might expect. Ian Fleming, the man who created James Bond, wrote the original 1964 novel longhand while recovering from a heart attack in 1961. His wife Anne confiscated his typewriter to force him to rest, so he reached for pen and paper instead. The book was based on bedtime tales Fleming told his only son Casper, and he dedicated it to Count Louis Borowski, a real Polish-American racing driver whose chain-driven aero-engined cars thundered around Brooklands in the early 1920s. Those machines were nicknamed Chitty Bang Bangs by the crowds who watched them race. Fleming died of a heart attack on August 12, 1964, Casper's 12th birthday, 2 months before the book was published and 4 years before the film opened. Producer Albert R. Cubby Broccoli had optioned Fleming's rights through his Bond dealings and was initially uninterested. That changed when the success of Mary Poppins convinced him there was a British Disney audience waiting to be captured. Every frame of warmth and wonder in this film is a posthumous love letter from a dying father to his son, filtered through the same producer who gave the world 007. Think about that the next time Carrickdakis begins telling a story on the beach. And that Bond connection was about to shape everything that came next, starting with who would star in the picture. Number 14. Here is something the film's cheerful opening never telegraphs. Dick Van Dyke said no. Multiple times, producer Cubby Broccoli kept raising the offer until it hit 7 figures plus a percentage of profits, before Van Dyke finally accepted. But money was not the only condition he set. He made one firm demand before signing: no British accent. His Cockney in Mary Poppins had been savaged by critics and was later voted the second worst movie accent in film history by Empire magazine. Van Dyke had no intention of repeating that experience. That single condition rewrote Carrickdakis from an English eccentric inventor into an American in an English village, changing the entire flavor of the character and the film around him. There was also a surprising personality match on set. Van Dyke was the person who brought Benny Hill aboard as a script consultant, and the two men became close friends during production, bonding over their shared love of silent comedy. Turns out the man singing Toot Sweets and dancing through the candy factory built the role entirely on his own terms, refused to repeat a famous mistake, and changed who Carrickdakis Potts actually was in the process. Next time you watch him sliding across a factory floor in that ridiculous candy testing sequence, remember, the accent you hear and the energy you feel cost Cubby Broccoli more than $1 million to unlock, and the woman standing beside him had her own complicated history with this role. Number 13. The role of Truly Scrumptious was first offered to Julie Andrews. Broccoli wanted to reunite the Mary Poppins team and put Andrews opposite Van Dyke again. Andrews turned it down because the part felt too similar to Poppins and She instead. Then came Sally Ann Howes. And here is where it gets genuinely strange, because this was not the first time Howes had stepped into a role that almost went to Andrews. In 1958, Howes replaced Andrews as Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady on Broadway at a higher salary. Twice in a decade, the same actress stepping into the same shadow, and audiences barely noticed either time. Howes was a classically trained soprano who performed all of her own singing. She was also the unofficial emotional anchor of the production. She took a crash course in dancing specifically to film the doll on a music box sequence and performed it in a single take in front of 150 extras. She also acted as an on-set guardian to child actor Heather Ripley, who was homesick during the long shoot. That poise you see in every Truly Scrumptious scene belongs to a performer who had built a career by stepping into roles that went to someone else, doing them beautifully, and letting the world assume it was always the plan. One more piece of casting played like a Hollywood inside joke, and this one involves the actor playing Carrickdakis' own father. Number 12. Lionel Jeffries was born on June 10, 1926. Dick Van Dyke was born on December 13, 1925. Jeffries was 6 months younger than Van Dyke and played his father on screen, and Van Dyke later said he never let Jeffries forget it. Jeffries had gone bald at 19 while serving as a captain in Burma during World War II. He briefly experimented with a wig and described it as looking like a dead moth on a boiled egg, then abandoned the idea immediately. That early hair loss allowed him to play characters decades older than himself throughout his career. Van Dyke later recalled, "Lionel is one of the funniest men I ever met, and we became close friends. But he was younger than me when he played my father, and I never let him forget it. Off-screen, Jeffries was a RADA-trained actor and Burma Star recipient who went on to direct The Railway Children in 1970, which became one of the most beloved British family films ever made. The man playing the bumbling grandfather was a decorated veteran and a serious craftsman in disguise. Every grumpy line Grandpa Potts delivers is performed by a man younger than the person playing his son. Once you know it, you cannot unsee the slightly uncomfortable age arithmetic happening in every scene they share. And speaking of things happening beneath the cheerful surface, the screenplay itself was being quietly fought over by 3 different writers at the same time. Number 11. The writing credit on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang reads Roald Dahl and Ken Hughes. That credit hides a far messier reality. The first screenwriter hired was Earl Hamner Jr., who would later create The Waltons. His script was rejected. Broccoli then brought in Roald Dahl, fresh off writing You Only Live Twice for the Bond franchise. Dahl delivered his draft, but director Ken Hughes began rewriting the pages almost immediately. Bond regular Richard Maibaum came in for further uncredited revisions. Dahl was reportedly fired roughly 5 weeks before shooting began on July 17, 1967. In a 1983 interview with Twilight Zone magazine, Dahl said, "Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was ghastly. Once you get a rotten director, or an egocentric director, you're dead. But they pay a lot, so you take the money and run." Ken Hughes told the press Dahl was no longer involved and that he had rewritten the entire scenario. Broccoli reportedly called Dahl's draft unusable and excluded him from the royal premiere. The tonal inconsistency viewers had argued about for decades has a clear source: 3 writers with 3 different visions fighting over a screenplay in real time. Watch the shift from English Fairground to Vulgarian Nightmare, and you are watching those 3 different voices colliding on screen. All that creative chaos also came with a price tag that alarmed the people signing the checks. The budget this film ultimately commanded changed what British filmmaking thought was possible at the time. Number 10. Budget figures for this production started at a reported $8 million in 1966 and climbed to $10 million, and by the time of release were being quoted in the New York Times at $12 million. The film was promoted as the largest and most expensive musical ever filmed in England. That scale required someone who knew how to build at Bond movie proportions. Production designer Ken Adam, who had created sets for Dr. No, Goldfinger, Thunderball, and You Only Live Twice, came aboard and built Vulgaria's interiors at Pinewood Studios as though they were 007 headquarters in costume. His underground grotto was inspired by Piranesi's imaginary prisons, and the airship was modeled on a 1904 French dirigible. When asked about his brief, Adam said he was told to design a car from the early 20th century, which is also sexy, and the rest of the world grew from that. United Artists spent $620,000 on an advance advertising campaign across 16 cities, reportedly the largest by any studio that far ahead of a release date, alongside approximately 150 licensed tie-in products. This was not a matinee film. It was a roadshow event picture designed to compete with Oliver and Funny Girl for prestige audiences. Every set and every costume was built to that standard. With a budget that large, location decisions took on a similar level of ambition, and not everything ended up being filmed where you might assume. Number 9. The English seaside picnic where Caractacus begins the Vulgaria bedtime story is one of the film's most recognizable images. Golden light, a dramatic cliff, the family arranged in that perfect movie family tableau. That is not England. The English summer of 1967 was, in Dick Van Dyke's words, miserable. Production relocated those scenes to Cap Taillat near Ramatuelle on the French Riviera. Van Dyke later noted that in some wide shots you can spot vineyards in the background that the crew tried to hide from frame. The cliff edge takeoff was filmed at Hope Gap between Seaford Head and Cuckmere Haven in Sussex, which is genuinely England. Vulgaria's village is Rothenburg ob der Tauber in Bavaria. Schloss Neuschwanstein was matted in as Baron Bombast's castle in post-production. What reads on screen as a single, continuous fairy tale geography is actually England, France, and Germany stitched together across different weeks of shooting. The dreamlike quality that makes the film feel like a story happening just outside real geography was partly an accident of a wet English summer forcing the crew to improvise. The sense that Chitty's world exists somewhere just off the edge of an ordinary map is not a creative decision. It is a weather problem that became an aesthetic. Now, once you have that geography in mind, you might start wondering about the most expensive single prop in the film. It had 4 wheels, an automatic gearbox, and a very specific reason for that last detail. Number 8. 6 versions of the car were built in 1967 by Allen Mann Racing in Hertfordshire, all working from Ken Adams' designs. Of those 6, only one was fully functional and road legal. It bore the registration Gen EI, meaning magical beings. That detail was taken directly from Fleming's novel and quietly embedded in the number plate. The hero car ran a Ford 3-liter Essex V6 engine with a Borg-Warner automatic gearbox. The automatic gearbox was not an engineering preference. The car was built around its leading man's driving limitations. The finished vehicle measured roughly 17.5 feet long, weighed approximately 2 tons, and used a dashboard plate sourced from a World War I British fighter plane. Van Dyke called it a little difficult to maneuver with the turning radius of a battleship. GN11 was owned by stand-in driver Pierre Picton from the early 1970s until 2011, when it sold at a Los Angeles Bonhams auction for $805,000. The buyer was Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson. Other vehicles handled close-up work and the flying shots, which is why every Chitty scene was likely a different car than the last, cut together seamlessly. While the cars were being engineered, a near-fatal accident almost removed the film's most frightening figure before any usable footage was captured. All right, we're at the halfway mark. Before we hit the top 7, I want to hear from you. What's your favorite Chitty Chitty Bang Bang quote or moment? Drop it in the comments, and if you're enjoying this, smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel grow. Number 7. Robert Helpmann was 59 years old when he played the child catcher, and during production, a horse-drawn carriage tipped over rounding a corner while he was inside it. Helpmann leaped clear using reflexes built across 4 decades of classical ballet training. Dick Van Dyke later said it was the most graceful thing I have ever seen in my whole life. Helpmann was not primarily known as an actor. He had partnered Margot Fonteyn at Sadler's Wells, danced with Anna Pavlova in her touring company, and starred opposite Moira Shearer in Powell and Pressburger's The Red Shoes in 1948. The child catcher's signature walk, that high-stepping, loping stride that makes audiences want to look away, was a deliberate choreographic choice, not a direction from Ken Hughes. Helpmann designed it himself from a dancer's understanding of how movement communicates threat. Off-camera, Helpmann was beloved by the children on set. Child actors Heather Ripley and Adrian Hall both said he was warm and protective with them, personally shielding them from on-set profanity directed at the cast by the director. Both children later attended Helpmann's funeral. That carriage accident could have removed the most iconic villain from the finished film before a single usable frame existed. And if Helpmann's ballet reflexes had not saved him, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang would carry an entirely different cultural legacy today. The most famous musical number in the film has its own story, and it begins with a wartime wound. Number 6. Robert B. Sherman drew on a personal memory when he wrote Me Ol' Bamboo. He had been wounded in the knee in 1945, and awarded the Purple Heart during his recovery in Taunton, Somerset. He watched Morris dancers using bamboo sticks while walking with a bamboo cane himself. That specific wartime image became the seed of the film's most physically demanding set piece. Choreographers Mark Brough and D.D. Wood, who had previously worked on Mary Poppins with the same Sherman brothers, built the fairground routine as a Morris dance number. Dick Van Dyke said the sequence took 23 takes and called it the hardest dance number I ever did. He was 41 years old during filming. Robert and Richard Sherman were working on their first major non-Disney project following Walt Disney's death in December 1966. They embedded their signature technique into the score, 2 complete and independent melodies woven into a single counterpoint duet. The Doll on a Music Box and Truly Scrumptious sequence uses exactly that structure, 2 songs that work individually and together simultaneously. A wartime knee wound, a walking stick, and a visual memory from an English market town became one of the film's most joyous and physically punishing showstoppers. Van Dyke nearly broke himself getting it right across those 23 attempts. And while all of that music was being made, the Bond family was hiding in plain sight across the entire production. Number 5. Desmond Llewellyn, Q from the Bond films, appears as scrap dealer Mr. Coggins. Special effects supervisor John Steers had won an Academy Award for Thunderball and would later win again for Star Wars. Ken Adam designed the sets. Richard Maibaum wrote scenes. Cubby Broccoli produced. Chitty was essentially a Bond film reconceived as a family musical that extended to the villain. Gert Frobe had played Auric Goldfinger for Broccoli in 1964. Broccoli brought him back as Baron Bombburst. In Goldfinger, Frobe's heavy German accent had been entirely dubbed by English actor Michael Collins because the performance was unusable as recorded. On Chitty, the accent was kept and turned into comedy. Casting the most famous Bond villain in a children's musical was a clear signal that Broccoli viewed this as the same caliber of event picture as 007. Barbara Broccoli, Cubby's daughter and the future producer of the Bond franchise, appeared as an extra in a fairground scene. Phil Collins, then 16 and working as a child actor, was reportedly cut from the Bulgarian children's scene because a large bandage covered a cyst on his head. Together, these connections made Chitty the most Bond-adjacent family film ever produced. This was Broccoli's only non-Bond Eon production beyond Call Me Buona in 1963. Made without partner Harry Saltzman, a personal project staffed entirely with his closest collaborators. The film's most disturbing invention came from somewhere unexpected, and two people both claimed credit for creating it. Number 4. None of Vulgaria exists in Ian Fleming's original novel. No Baron, no Baroness. No Toymaker, no Vulgaria at all. Roald Dahl invented the entire second half of the film. He created the bomb bursts, the country, the underground grotto, the bedtime story framing device that lets Carrick narrate the whole thing to his children on the beach. The film's dual structure, gentle English fairground followed by dark Teutonic nightmare, was Dahl's structural fingerprint. Director Ken Hughes claimed in press interviews that he personally wrote every scene by the end of production. Archive drafts held at the Roald Dahl Museum in Great Missenden contain a child catcher figure in Dahl's earliest treatments, which suggests the authorship dispute is not as simple as either man made it sound. What is not in dispute is Dahl's response to the finished film. In a 1983 Twilight Zone magazine interview, he said, "Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was ghastly. Once you get a rotten director or an egocentric director, you're dead. But they pay a lot, so you take the money and run." Dahl was excluded from the Royal Command performance premiere. His response was to say publicly, "I don't give a damn whether we met the royal family or not." The writer who invented the film's most memorable half refused to attend its own premiere, publicly denounced the director, and still has a legitimate claim to the most frightening character ever placed in a family film. And that character deserves his own section. Number 3. The child catcher does not exist in Fleming's novel or in any published children's book. He exists only in a screenplay. Yet a 2005 BBC CBBC poll voted him the scariest villain in children's books, despite having never appeared in one. Robert Helpman reportedly removed his false teeth on set to make himself look gaunter and more skeletal. The entire performance was built from his ballet training rather than conventional acting choices. The high-stepping walk, the way he seems to flow toward children rather than walk toward them, was choreographed by Helpman himself. Child actor Heather Ripley said off-camera, "Helpman was the least scary person I have ever met in my life. The terror was entirely constructed through physical technique, removed teeth, 4 decades of stage movement, and one choreographic decision about how to cross a cobblestone square." At the 2012 London Olympics opening ceremony, the child catcher was performed live alongside Cruella de Vil and Voldemort as defining British cultural villains. He was the only one of the three not represented by an inflatable, because nobody could figure out how to make him funny. A figure invented at a screenplay level, embodied through dance technique, became more culturally durable than almost every adult horror creation of the same decade. And when the film opened, almost nobody thought any of this was going to last. Number 2. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang grossed roughly $7.5 million worldwide, against a budget that by most accounts landed between $10 and $12 million. United Artists lost an estimated $8 million on the initial release. The film was pulled from its roadshow run early and quietly re-released as a summer kids film in August 1969, by which point Disney's The Love Bug had captured the family audience. Director Ken Hughes said in later interviews, "I did Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and I didn't enjoy making it. The film made a lot of money, but that doesn't really make me feel any better about it." Sally Ann House's 5-picture Broccoli deal was largely never fulfilled. The film Broccoli had envisioned as Britain's answer to Mary Poppins was a commercial disappointment in its original release window. Decades of television airings, VHS, and DVD rebuilt it into something its original audience never predicted. The 2002 London Palladium stage adaptation became the longest-running show in the Palladium's history, earning over £70 million. Its stage car cost £750,000 and holds the Guinness World Record as the most expensive stage prop ever built. Peter Jackson paid $805,000 for GN11. The warm cultural permanence attached to this film is entirely the result of domestic television rescuing something its own studio had quietly walked away from. Number 1. Consider what this film actually is. A posthumous love letter from Ian Fleming written from a hospital bed. Adapted by Roald Dahl, who invented the entire Vulgaria half and publicly hated the result. Produced by Cubby Broccoli as his only non-Bond Eon production. Staffed entirely with 007 collaborators. The most expensive British musical of its era. Filmed across England, France, and Germany because the English summer was unusable. Built around a car with an automatic gearbox because the star could not drive manual. Featuring a villain invented in a screenplay who was never in any novel, performed by a ballet dancer who took his teeth out and survived a carriage accident. Special effects by an Oscar winner who later worked on Star Wars. Production design by the man who built Goldfinger's lair, the Goldfinger villain himself, in a silly hat. All of them making a children's musical together. It lost $8 million and was quietly shelved. Then television found it, and a generation found it through television, and that generation brought its children to it, and eventually the stage car cost £750,000 and broke a world record. Every creative accident, every fired writer, every weather-forced location change, every automatic gearbox concession fed into something that refused to stay buried. That is the whole story of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and it remains genuinely extraordinary. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang overcame a posthumous novel, 3 feuding writers, a director nobody could control, an English summer that chased production to France, and a box office failure that nearly ended the story permanently. The most beloved family film of its era lost millions on release and survived entirely on the strength of a second life on television. Every accident and compromise fed into something that generations refused to let disappear. The flying car, the child catcher, the truly scrumptious songs, the grandpa and the outhouse, all of it was built on decisions nobody fully intended. If this video surprised you, drop your favorite fact in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves this movie as much as you do. And as always, this old car just saved our lives. We'll see you next time.